when I die, please throw me in the compost pile. I remember the first time that I heard Joel Salatin say that. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Joel Salatin, but he is considered America's most famous farmer. He's a fascinating guy. I highly recommend that you look into him. But yeah, I remember watching an interview with him, and he says, when he passes away, that he wants his family to throw him into the compost pile rather than bury him in a box or cremate him or anything like that. And at first, I just thought it was kind of funny, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized what a profound statement it actually was, what he was saying. Um, I'm hanging out here at my worm farm, obviously. And, I have a lot of different interests. And over the years, I've learned from a lot of different people. And a couple of the guys that have really influenced me in the last couple of years, one would be John Vervaeke, and I hope I'm saying his name right, from the University of Toronto. He's a professor there, super smart guy, talks about culture, talks about all sorts of different things, has a bunch of YouTube videos that I would also highly recommend you look into. And another guy that has influenced me a lot is John David Ebert. And John is a professor of sorts. I don't think he's attached to any particular university, but he has a ton of YouTube videos where he kind of recapitulates philosophy, different philosophers, and he has certainly made some contributions of his own. And in studying those two guys, let's start with John David Ebert. So one of the things that John talks about is how all of culture is sort of a reaction to death, and sort of like the overwhelming anxiety that we all feel about the fact that we're all going to die, and our friends and family are all going to pass away at some point. That the anxiety that those thoughts create is actually what drives our culture and our religious institutions. And what he points out is that just about every religion of any significance started off with a change in funerary rites. It's kind of a tough word to say, but the way that we have funerals is what it comes down to. And he talks about the ancient Egyptians and how the Egyptian religion was sort of centered on mummification and the preservation of the body. He talks about how early Christianity was actually a religion of the catacombs. Christianity started off with services being held in the catacombs, and the thing about Christianity was it was this whole new way of looking at the afterlife, the resurrection of the dead, things like that. And as you kind of progress through time, and you come up to the modern day, our contemporary times here, I think it's fair to say that we have sort of lost our way when it comes to dealing with death. Anyone who's read James Joyce, knows that funerals and wakes used to be a huge part of our culture. And people used to die in their own homes. Like now we send people to, a nursing home or hospice care because it's easier in a lot of ways. I have family myself right now in a nursing home, and it's really hard. But historically in the past, families sort of took care of their own right up until death, and death itself was a big part of family life in the sense that the wakes and the funerals, just a huge part of our culture. And we've gotten away from that, in the last, certainly since the baby boom. Now death is seen as something separate. It's something that's ignored. It's kind of something that we're in denial about. So, that's why, and we could actually say the same thing about incarceration, about punishment. Punishment is something that used to be very public, and now it's just sort of put somewhere else where we don't have to look at it. And death is certainly like that. We don't like to look at it, so we don't really have it incorporated into our lives anymore. And when I heard Joel Salatin talk about, throw me in the compost pile, I was already doing worms. And, it really got me thinking how, the worms, I know it sounds crazy, but there's like a profound philosophy that goes with composting and with taking care of worms, because it's very obvious when you take care of worms that death is part of life. And when you're dealing with compost in general, compost is decomposition. Death is part of the cycle. And a lot of what we're doing here with the worms and the compost pile is sort of interacting with death. And it's not a depressing thing at all. A significant number of worms die here. I mean, not that many, but my kids have seen a lot of worms die, and they're confronted with this whole notion of death, on a regular basis. And compost, with the bacteria and the fungus, eating away at organic material, it's life and death. John Vervaeke, the guy from University of Toronto, he kind of somewhat hubristically, talks about the need for a new religion. And he has all sorts of ideas about what that religion might look like. And, it's kind of cool hearing him talk about it. But, when I hear him discussing these things, one of the things that occurs to me is like, yeah, we need new funerary rites. Man, I'm having a tough time saying that word today. But new funeral rites. We need to have a different way of disposing with bodies, for lack of a better way to put it. And I actually think that the compost pile makes a ton of sense. I think it's rather beautiful, and I think that the notion of being reintegrated into the earth, to have bacteria break down the body and reincorporate it into usable material, man, I think that that's really cool. And one of the things that I love about working with the worms and working with compost is just dealing with this stuff on a regular basis, having it be part of life, having it be part of my kids' lives, And so I think that, I know this is kind of off the beaten path, like the last video I was just talking about wood chips and how to use them from a business perspective, but one of the reasons that I'm doing worms is that it's not just a business to me. It's actually like a whole way of life. It's a whole way of looking at life. And it's really uplifting, and it's really meaningful. And to have to kind of deal with life and death with eyes open, it's helpful. It's helpful. And our culture's in big trouble right now. Like, a lot of people are depressed, a lot of people are sad. I read this article yesterday about how like 60% of high school kids are depressed. I mean, we got to figure this one out. And I think one of the ways that we can do it is getting our hands back in the dirt. Working with these little creatures, these little worms, and seeing how life and death are just sort of part of each other, and how we can integrate it into our lives in a very meaningful way. And so I hope this isn't too crazy for you guys. I used to have a channel a long time ago where we talked about all sorts of different stuff, and this is probably a little bit resembling that, but I promise, next video will be more straightforward on the worms and the business of worm farming and stuff like that. But I just wanted to share, how it's not just a business to me. It's like an entire lifestyle. It's an entire culture. And I really think that we could all sort of benefit from putting our hands in the dirt and reacquainting ourselves with the circle of life, so to speak. So hope everybody's doing well. I will talk to you guys soon.